All right, let's try this again, guys. Um, Sorry about that. There was a little bit of a mix up on my new computer, but you know what? There's always that one person that doesn't know what's happening with their slides. Okay, let me start this again. So my name is Nadya, as mentioned. I'll go through, I already went through that spiel. It's kind of what I was talking about with both. Everyone can see my slides now, right? I'm hoping that we can. So what I'll do is I'll jump in. So let's skip through this. Let me start by backtracking a bit. I'm going to share a little bit of my experience with content scale and content growth from when I was at Venngage. So at that time, I had joined the team back in 2015, and I was the fourth person on the marketing team, fourth person on the team, first person on the marketing team. And at that time, the company was generating roughly 400 leads or signups to the tool a week. And of course, this was a freemium model tool, a B2C platform. So the scale functions a little bit differently. And fast forward, to end of 2021, that number was a lot closer to 150,000 people a week that were signing up for Venngage and the platform. And the real interesting factor here is that our strategy hadn't changed that much. We focused primarily on achieving organic traffic through content marketing strategies. Barely spent any money on advertising, really on social media ads whatsoever. It was all really focused on content and really creating good quality and high quality content for our audience. So we managed to achieve growth quite rapidly. In fact, we were scaling at an average rate of about 150% year over year, again, with no funding, no additional budget coming in. I believe on my first day, I was told to just go scale traffic and I had no budget. But the interesting part here, and this is where I'm going to really focus in on, is that 10% of those leads that were coming in every week were specifically being generated from our blog with a direct conversion rate of about 5% from visit to registration. That being said, we did have a lot of other content and pages that sat at different stages of the funnel, but there really is an opportunity here to use your blog content as an actual inbound method to acquire a lot of good quality leads. And the reason for that is, earlier around 2017, end of 2018 or early 2018, we decided it was time to revise the content strategy in order to achieve a more consistent and predictable method of growth. And so that's where you kind of see that trend, starting to trickle up. And eventually about 25% of the leads that we were driving were actually coming from the blog itself. Now, for whatever reason, when I talk to people, I notice a lot of people are really opposed to trying content marketing at this scale. In fact, I've heard lots of excuses from people, people saying that they chose not to double down because it doesn't convert, takes too long to see results, it isn't scalable, the list goes on. And so what happens is instead of relying on content, people rely on pouring money into ads because it's faster, it's easier, you can see that direct line of attribution. But what happens when you don't have a budget for ads or your LTV isn't high enough to sustain them, which was the case with us, right? Now it's different when you're in a B2B company and you can spend a little bit more money on acquiring the right bottom of funnel lead because your deal size is a lot higher. So we had to be a lot more scrappy here. So today I want to share the exact framework that we use at Venngage to prove that content marketing is actually really effective and scalable when it comes to growth. You just need to approach it the right way and think more like a growth marketer. So even though I run content, I still consider myself to be a growth marketer at the core. And this is the framework that really helped, achieve that. And the reason for that is a lot of content marketers might focus overly on the story side of things, but they're not really paying attention to the data and the inputs that impact real growth. So this is why I say you have to approach content like a growth marketer. So maybe you've decided or attempted at content marketing. I'm sure a lot of people here have as a strategy. And some people who haven't seen success are kind of following this loop, right? You start out by writing an article, then you publish, then you wait, and then you probably don't see much improvement. So you start the cycle again, which is natural because why wouldn't you do something insane? And the process just keeps going this way. And maybe, after continuing that cycle, your growth looks something like this, pretty flat. There's a consistent amount of traffic coming in. You just get some spikes here and there, but nothing really to write home about. Or maybe it's something like this, it consistently is flat again, organically, and you still get a couple of those spikes. Or maybe it's something like this, like you get a little bit of a wave that you can follow, but ultimately, again, nothing to brag about. And I love using these examples because these are companies that are, advocates of content marketing, and they're the ones that you're probably reading a lot about content growth from. And unfortunately, these are the experts that aren't not able to practice what they preach. So today I want to cover 4 important aspects of preparing your content strategy to achieve the scalable growth so that your traffic looks a little less like this and a little bit more like this. And yes, that's me skiing down the slopes of success. So there are 4 parts of the framework that I want to talk about today are goals, research, authority, and promotion. In other words, GRAP. It's like grape without the E. And yes, I know I could probably add an E, but I'll come to that in the version 2 of this talk. So the first thing I want to talk about is the G, which stands for goals, right? How do you establish specific goals for various types of content? Now, when I'm thinking of the purpose behind content, obviously it's meant to attract and engage and ideally like close deals throughout your pipeline, throughout your buyer journey. But at the core, we still want to win at Google. So this is a very simple flow chart that I created that shows what winning at Google looks like. If you forget about this, just remember it looks like a one-legged stick man who's lying down. So the main thing here that I want to focus in on is that there's these 3 endpoints, right? And all of these things really lead at the end of the day back to winning at Google. Ultimately, we want to achieve at least one of these 3 things, right? We have higher domain authority, we have higher conversions, more traffic. Most people want all of those things, at least one of those things. And so what do we do as marketers is we decide, what, let's create one magic piece of content that's going to help us achieve all of these goals right off the bat. And much like many of our dreams, that doesn't come true. And the reality is we can't try to achieve multiple different goals with the same action, right? It's not going to work that way. So you might have a product or service that falls into a relatively niche industry. And maybe you're really good at creating content that's optimized for conversions, or it's generally easier to do that. But that content might not be the thing that's going to get you a lot of traffic because of how niche your product is, right? So the content in question is only achieving one goal. So my proposition is we break out these goals, right? And so this is how one of the ways that we used to approach things at Engage, and this is specific, but the framework applies to any industry really. When achieving the goal of higher domain authority, we would create what we internally refer to as viral or editorial content, right? And the purpose here is to really achieve a higher domain authority because we're looking for press links, we're looking for highly qualified sites to talk about our content. For higher conversions, we would go after what we called internally as actionable or how-to content. These are articles that or pieces of content that are meant to inspire in conversions, to educate our audience, to really tell them how to go through some of the nitty-gritty details. Maybe not going to get a lot of traffic, especially if you're in a niche industry, but it still works to actually help users along that journey. And then we have inspirational content. The purpose here is to rank on various high volume keywords, as well as various long tail keywords. And so the goal here is ultimately traffic to get people onto the page so that we can then later on, whatever you choose to do, retarget them, nurture them, push them through email campaigns, get them into that latter end of the funnel. So we'll take a zoom in at a closer glance. So when we're talking about higher domain authority, right, like really in a nutshell, we're trying to get good press mentions here, good links. Let's just say good links. So chances are, let's say, I'm reaching out to like Forbes or Mashable or one of these other big sites, and I say, hey, here's my article on 35 simple background images and templates and blah, blah, blah. They're probably not going to be interested in writing about that because it's not really something that's that newsworthy, that appealing to a larger audience, right? Because the purpose of going after some of these larger sites is their audience is a lot more broad. So they are not necessarily always looking for niche content. Now, this also applies to niche sites that do have the right audience. And so maybe this will work in a specific environment, but for purpose for the state of argument, we're going to go with the fact that it's not accepted. But they might be interested in something that's a little bit more data heavy, right? More data driven, something like a statistics piece. I think Andy mentioned this before, but original research is, at the core of everything you should be doing, especially when it comes to domain authority building. Now, people are much more likely to find new data interesting. And if we take a closer look here, I've taken a snapshot from Ahrefs, but looking at the performance here, right, you can see that that article on visual content marketing statistics that we had put together performed really well, drove 1,000 different backlinks, 482 unique domains linking to it. But if you look at the traffic, it's only driving 18 sessions a month. Now, most people think that you need a lot of links in order to get a lot of traffic. Not directly the same goal, kind of going back to what I mentioned before. But our other article that's really optimized for a lot of traffic only has 6 referring domains and 8 links and is driving close to 15,000 sessions a month in traffic. So hopefully you're starting to see how those two things connect. So your content calendar can really no longer just be a list of these fun ideas to write about. You need to have a strategic view, and you need to think about each of these goals differently and take it into account. And one of the things that I'm learning, especially in a new company now, is like how important it is to actually measure and track, because if you're not tracking the actual inputs that you think are going to achieve these goals, you're not going to achieve them. So even if user acquisition is this landscape at the top of the funnel, you still need to approach it like its own funnel, because within that funnel, there's a lot of different steps that you need to consider. And so once you have those goals defined, the next step is really getting into the research side of things. So research, when I think about it, and this is similar to how a lot of content marketers I've approached, when they think about getting rankings on different types of keywords, a lot of people will jump right into writing as many pieces of content as possible, going fully volume-based. But that doesn't really work, right? So people are spending a lot of money and time creating all types of content with very little strategy on how that is actually going to perform. And so what's happening is they're flatlining here. But really the process should start with keyword research. Now, I'm not going to say that you only use keywords as the content driver. This is more to gain insight and an understanding of what your audience is actually interested in looking for. A lot of people that are going into new market creation, for instance, don't start with this step because they know that they're creating a new market. But how do you get people to understand what that new market is? So when it comes to keyword research, the way I see it is there's these 2 types of pages that you can promote ultimately, right? And I'll jump. This one is a little bit farther. So I'll come back to that slide. There's with keyword research is an organization system that I'm using to figure out, what types of terms I can actually go after, what's actually going to be possible for me to rank for. And the purpose of the system, and I'll zoom in a little bit, is to really get an understanding of the terms and the categories that you can go after, the topics that you can go after. So this is an example of something from my blog, right? Let's say the 2 main categories on my blog that I might write about are leadership and marketing. Now, when we zoom into leadership, you go into Google Keyword Planner, you type in leadership, you're not going to get an understanding of like the actual topics related to leadership, right? You're just going to get a bunch of terms that are about leadership. So you kind of have to think a little bit more contextually here. But when I think of leadership, I think of management, company culture, personal development, productivity. There's a lot more themes and topics that we can write about here. Now, structuring this, when I'm Googling and looking at how many searches all of these terms are getting, you can see the volume's quite high, right? About 100,000 plus average searches a month. And for my little blog that doesn't have that much authority built yet, it's going to be really, really difficult for me to rank on a term like leadership. And the reality is for that, it's not really going to convert. It's a very highly informational term. So instead, what we do is I start breaking out these topics or these larger categories into these subcategories to understand now what the terms are that are related. And so as we do that, we can keep zooming in, and by the end of that that exercise, you're getting to terms that are a lot more narrow and a lot more niche and unique, and are probably going to be a lot easier for me to actually address a very specific question and provide a good answer to it. So something like good management skills. Now, this is something I can actually write an actionable piece of content on, right? I can help people understand how to do that. Whereas leadership, a little bit too broad. But ultimately what we're doing here is we're creating this map of topics so that we can understand how all of this fits back together and loops into our main core theme that we actually want to write about, want to rank for. Which brings us to authority building. So I think everyone's very familiar with the concept of you write a pillar topic and then you kind of branch out. But this is ultimately to build out this content authority and this system. So this is where this content system, organization system really comes in handy, is because now we're actually trying to build out specific content that addresses all of this this whole system of authority that we're building out. So now I might have my pillar page on like what is leadership, which I will eventually try to rank for it or create this sense of authority so that Google and my audience actually recognizes me as a pillar for leadership. And this is where I might start building out some of these suggested content types, right? We have like our editorial articles. So maybe I'll write something about leadership skills CEOs of Fortune 500 companies possess. And maybe I'll create like another inspirational content that's relatively similar or within the same niche. And then I might create an actual piece of content. And then eventually what we are doing is we're building out this interconnected web of topics that connect back into that main bubble or pillar that we're creating. If you hear pitter patters in the back, that's just my dogs are running around excited. And so when we get to this, you can see what I'm trying to get to here is that all of these other pieces of content that we created when we had those broken out goals are really connecting back to this like what is leadership page, right? So they're interlinking back and pretty much we're leveraging our content to help fuel and build and scale those main pages or those main topics that we really do want to be recognized as. And now obviously like none of this really matters unless you're promoting your content, which is why the last stage of the framework is the promotion side. And unfortunately, there's too many people that spend a lot of time creating content, but not enough promoting it, right? Once you've created a lot of content with a specific goal in mind, the next step is really getting it in front of the right people. And this is kind of it's based on speculation chart, but how it follows the 80-20 rule here. We want to actually invert this chart, right? We want the purple to be at the 20 and the yellow to be up at 80, because I think that's where you're really going to get the most bang for your buck. And I'll show you an example of this. So this is an example from earlier in the talk where I highlighted our expert who's flatlining. Now, I took a deep dive into their traffic, and this is the traffic drive that's being driven from about 10 of their top pages. 13% coming to the first page, 11% to the second page, and it fizzles off pretty quickly by the 10th page, right? And this is pretty common. A lot of people have, that kind of unicorn piece that is really driving most of the volume, most of their conversions, whatever it might be. We really want to balance and diversify this. Now, what's interesting is this site, when I looked at it, have over 5,000 blog posts published. When I looked even deeper, only 500 were actually driving any traffic whatsoever, one traffic. But the purpose of a blog post is not necessarily to just be used later on in that funnel, right? It's not a gated piece of content. This is something that is ideally meant to rank on a series of terms. So in other words, only 10% of all of their pages were actually performing when it comes to what their purpose was. And so it seems a little bit like a waste, because now we're spending all of these resources on producing a lot of content, but no one's actually seems to be spending the resources on the promotion, which is why promotion should take up more time than creation. And for a comparison, while I was at Venngage, we had about 250 articles driving about 2.5 million sessions. So you can see that the content, the blog content, is not always going to be the first thing that will drive traffic. There's other methods you can use. So when we're promoting, of course, the way that we promote is going to vary, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on here because we talked about this a little bit, but obviously if we're going to go after the higher domain authority, we want to focus on quality backlinks. We don't want to just do mass outreach and talk to everybody. We want the right people, the right press sites actually talking about our content. So that we'll take that as the actual goal in the strategy. But for higher conversions and more traffic, Forbes might not be into your articles talking about how to, maybe in the leadership context, yes, but they're not going to be interested in, how to make an infographic or how to do X, Y, Z that's specifically for your niche. This is where we actually want to create that authority or diversification of the right sites linking back to us and talking about us. Because in a nutshell, if you're focusing on scaling up your organic traffic through content, ultimately as marketers, we're all just searching for these precious little backlinks. In terms of how, I'll run through this quickly, but there's two main tools that I think are useful that can fit into your budget. The first is Ahrefs and the second is Mailshake. I'll just show you a quick snapshot of how I kind of approach this, but I'll give you an example. So let's say one method that you can use is looking through popular content on Ahrefs with their Content Explorer tool. So this is something that I've done in the past, but let's say I was trying to rank for the term infographic design, right? I'd use Content Explorer to see who'd actually written about the subject. And typically we still want to, acquire decent domain. So not going to go after the lower quality ones. And then I might get a list of, all these sites, but the reality is if I'm looking for somebody who's writing about infographic design, they're probably not going to want to write about or link to my content because now we're competing with each other. So what I'd actually do is I would look for specific terms within the content that is not about the same topic that I'm writing about. So in this example, we have, a visual compendium of glowing creatures, which sounds really interesting, but they're talking about infographic design in the first paragraph. So I want to become this person's friend so that they can embed my content that is not competing with them into their article. And in order to do that, Mailshake is a tool that we use for personalization and for outreach. I think it's important to be able to track this effectively. So this is a good tool recommendation. And a couple of just quick, best practices when doing cold outreach, because it's a sensitive topic. A lot of people don't like to do cold outreach. My rule of thumb is, everybody, all of your friends were a stranger before they became your friends. So you're going to have to give it a shot. So the first rule is don't sound like a robot. This is an example LinkedIn message that someone on my team had received, but then they had also sent the same message to everyone on the marketing team. And so it was very quick to realize that this was not really called well, that they were actually just sending mass messages to everybody. So don't sound like a robot. Which brings me to the next point, call your lists to make sure that your content is relevant and the person you're pitching is relevant. Last thing you want to do is pitch a competitor. And that's happened to me before, so it's not fun. The next tip is, inject your personality in your emails. You should be yourself unless yourself sucks, and be someone better. That's usually my rule of thumb. And this is actually an example of a follow-up. I know you can't see it, but I'll kind of give you some context here. I have a pretty self-deprecating humor sometimes. About the third drip within a series of sequences that I was sending out, I sent this email because I still hadn't gotten any replies. And the email said, "Yep, it's me again, but before you delete this email, did you get a chance to think about, helping me out, giving me that link?" And then I said, "Again, if you don't want to, or you can't for whatever reason, that's fine. In fact, I'm helping you out. So I've put together a list of rejections that I've received in the past. So feel free to use any of these rejections or, just say no." And I'm like, "But by all means, you don't like these rejections, which include, please go away, I don't like you, unsubscribe in all caps, and not interested, and my favorite, F you." So I told them, if you don't like those ones, feel free to send a different one and I'll add that to my list of rejections. And what's interesting is this actually increased my response rate by about 50%, as well as the follow through rate. So people do like to see something that just stands out a little bit from the day-to-day drawl that we as marketers always get. But most importantly, what we're really doing here is we're trying to give people a reason to care. And the more they care, the more chances you are actually building that relationship. So this is something, so sometimes the shorter, sweeter emails don't necessarily work. Sometimes you have to provide a little bit more context in how you're actually communicating with people. Because like I said, again, your friends were all strangers first, and really this is the process of content and organic traffic building is a long-term strategy, right? As well as link building is a long-term strategy. So you really want to build these relationships and use a data-driven and iterative approach to growing, not only with content, but with the rest of your business. So here's a brief summary of GRAP, in case you already forgot, and a few content resources. So the ones at the bottom is actually like a longer, so I wrote an article on my site that goes into a little bit more detail. There's some of the templates that I talked about, but you can feel free to email me directly to ask any questions about this, but also to ask any questions about my change, my shift, and content in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadya. That was fantastic. I have a couple questions. Also, anybody who has questions, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We've got time for a couple here. So one thing I liked was your focus on, you have a piece of content, you've got a purpose for that piece of content. It's not like a diluted, it's going to serve all things. We preach that at Omniscient as well. How do you choose the portfolio allocation of, domain authority content, conversion content, and traffic content? Like, do you have sort of a percentage split, or like, does that change with company scale? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. The high domain authority, or like the viral editorial content, is usually very heavy work, right? There's a lot that goes into it. So that's not necessarily taking up the majority, but we know like 1-2 pieces of content, maybe a quarter, is really going to help us scale up everything else that we need. So in terms of split, usually it'll be like 10% is the the high domain authority content, and then maybe like 40% is that actionable content. The remainder is really going into the inspirational content, because everything has to tie back to like that revenue attribution. At least in my mind, I need to see that the right metrics are being hit. And the goal isn't just links, right? It's not just traffic, it's conversions at the end of the day. So all of this stuff is really to lift up the conversions and the lead acquisition. So we still want most of it to be focused on that, and try to find a way to maybe sometimes create these hybrid pieces of content, which we've done in the past as well. But yeah, we're really just trying to use the domain authority to get the brand out, or like create these viral content pieces that will, get shared frequently, that are a little bit evergreen as well, in some cases, to support everything else.
And how do you approach promotion with these various buckets? I know you said that promotion's underrated in general, but do y'all spend most of your time promoting the viral domain authority type pieces, or do you still apply that promotion effort to your, how to product-based content, conversion-based content, or how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, everything. I think there's methods for promotion. So for everything, the PR press kind of things are a little bit more difficult, because it is like, you're kind of competing with everybody who wants to get onto these sites. We've built a lot of relationships with press sites where, I know them and I'll ask them up front if this is something that they're into. When it comes to the other type of content, that's usually where we've used different processes. I didn't talk about it in this version, I didn't have time to get to it, but we've used what we call the guestographic process, which is really just a value add piece of content, right? It doesn't have to be that, it could be anything. Maybe you're a video platform, you like create some free video content for them, do something that will just make it easier for them to want to work with you. That was one way that we used to really scale getting like the right ask and the right anchor text for something that's a little bit more competitive. Let's say a sales page, right, that you want to rank on, but no one is actually interested in linking to that because it's a sales page. So those are where we actually start building out those relationships, and maybe have like, some friends that we could pull a favor from. The inspirational content is usually not, we don't need to do that much on it. That might be through guest posting, through just sharing it, someone will pick it up. But usually that one is so long tail in terms of traffic that our goal is not to rank for one term, we're trying to rank for thousands and thousands of really, really narrow terms that we can actually pull back in.
Cool. That makes sense. Let's do one more. I want to ask about the conversion rates, because 5% conversion rate, even on average, is pretty incredible from blog to sign up. I worked on freemium acquisition at HubSpot. That's a pretty good conversion rate. One, I'm assuming there's a variance in the conversion rate, right? I'm assuming some content was very high and some was almost non-existent.
Yeah.
Did you?
That was, sorry, go ahead.
Did you find any patterns? Like, is there any heuristics that you came to conclude in terms of like what types of content would convert much higher?
Yeah, and like I will preface that we were like a template driven B2C infographic tool, right? So like every one of the things that we created was what we did, which is where like the growth part of content comes in from. I don't think a lot of content marketers approach content this way. Was our templates page, right? So we had like one static template page, and one of the biggest initiatives we did is I was like, well, let's reformat this entire system so that it becomes a scalable acquisition channel where every template has the CTA. So then what we would do is eventually we were able to scale to thousands and thousands. So now we have thousands of mini landing pages for really, really long tail terms that are constantly being produced that people can come in from. And so that was like one of the biggest channels that we had. So when we were launching this, what we found is like a lot of people through emails, we would send out these roundups of template newsletters, and people would love them. So we started doubling up and saying, well, what if we write articles that are roundups of these template posts? So not only will they acquire people directly, but we'll be able to actually rank on a series of different terms. So that was one of the things that really lifted that approach. Now I know that this is like an isolated method, but templates and checklist terms in general, like people want useful content. So maybe it's not going to be a direct sign up to your site, but you could create a series of your own embedded templates, PDFs, downloads, whatever you have that is relevant to your audience. It doesn't have to be something they can use in your platform, but in B2B, like in a more B2B approach, you're not necessarily going to drive people directly into a platform. It's not as linear as B2C, right? But you can start to use these methods to actually get them into the top of the funnel. And once you understand, you know, like, hey, maybe there's X series of templates that you created or checklists that's really working for you down that pipeline, and sales is like, yo, who are these people? Like, keep sending them my way. Then you start to know where to double down your efforts more. And this is where it becomes really important to measure everything that you're doing and have a strong intention with the type of content rather than just creating, again, something fun, because it seems like a good idea. It has to attribute all the way back to the end of the funnel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a perfect transition because it sounds like what you're doing is really mapping this purchase journey to specific keywords and figuring out which intent and basically trying to serve the user experience that serves that intent. So thank you, Nadya.